Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that's pretty interesting, I think, about semiconductors.
Okay.
And specifically what's been going on in the last few years with the U.S. sanctions on China and how that's really shaken up the global landscape of chip making and everything, and how those sanctions may have actually backfired.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And actually ended up fueling China's homegrown chip industry.
It is a paradox.
Yeah.
You know, the U.S. is trying to limit or slow down China's technological rise.
Right.
And they may have inadvertently catalyzed it.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
Uh-huh.
And speaking of fire, this whole story has some pretty, scorching numbers. I mean, just look at this. In just 2 years, China slashed their semiconductor imports by a whopping $200 billion.
Wow.
That's a huge amount.
That is a lot.
That's not just like a little dip that's like swan diving away from foreign ships.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's a clear indication that China's Made in China 2025 initiative is kicking into overdrive.
Mm.
You know, the sanctions, I think, created a sense of urgency.
Uh-huh.
Pushed China to double down on domestic chip production.
Yeah.
You know, they're pouring billions into R&D, building new facilities, and fostering homegrown tech champions.
So they're basically saying, like, okay, you wanna play hardball.
Right.
We'll show you hardball.
Exactly.
So, okay, so we got China pumping the brakes on imports and ramping up their own production. But what was the U.S. thinking when they imposed these sanctions in the first place? I mean, what was the logic there?
Well, the U.S. government cited national security concerns.
Okay.
You know, China's growing military expansion and their influence in cyberspace were seen as threats.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought by restricting access to advanced chips, this was their way of trying to, you know, maintain a technological edge.
Maintain the lead.
Maintain the lead, exactly.
That.
Yeah. And Gina Raimondo, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, you know, made a statement about this, saying that it was essential to safeguard these technologies to protect U.S. interests.
Okay, so they're saying national security.
Right.
We got to protect our own interests here.
Mm-hmm.
But how did they not see this coming? I mean, did they really think that China was just going to take this lying down?
It's hard to say.
I mean, China's not just passively accepting these sanctions. They're turning it into like a launch pad.
Yeah.
It's like they said, okay, you want to play hardball, we'll show you hardball.
Exactly.
And I think like the poster child for this defiance has got to be Huawei, right?
Absolutely. I mean, remember when everyone thought Huawei was down for the count?
Oh, yeah.
After those initial sanctions hit? I mean, they lost access to key components.
Right.
They were cut off from essential software updates.
Mm-hmm.
But then in 2023, they unveiled that Mate 6 Pro smartphone.
And that was a big deal.
Huge.
Because it wasn't just any phone.
It
was
was.
packing some serious heat.
Absolutely.
What was in that thing?
Yeah. So the Mate 6 Pro featured a domestically produced 7-nanometer Kirin chip,
Okay.
which is a really powerful processor. And it really showed the world that China was capable of innovating under pressure.
Under pressure.
And this wasn't just about keeping up. You know, this was a statement.
Yeah.
They were like, we're here.
We can do this.
We could do this.
And we're gonna do it on our own.
Exactly.
So not only did they manage to produce a high-end chip, you know, all on their own, but they went a step further, right? They started building their entire 5G infrastructure with Chinese components.
Yeah, they did.
Talk about a mic drop moment.
Yeah, it sent shockwaves through the industry.
Yeah.
I mean, even seasoned analysts were really caught off guard by this.
Yeah.
And Dan Hutchison from Tech Insights, you know, a company that specializes in analyzing these semiconductors,
Yeah.
he said something really interesting.
What'd he say?
He said, China's technological resilience has surpassed even the boldest forecasts.
Wow, so even the experts underestimated them.
It seems that way.
But it's not just about Huawei making a comeback, though, right? It's China's entire semiconductor industry is experiencing this like huge growth spurt.
Yes.
And the numbers are pretty mind-boggling. We talked about that import drop before, but what does that actually look like on the ground?
Okay, so if you look at the figures in 2021, China imported $432 billion
Wow.
worth of semiconductors.
That's a lot.
Fast forward just 2 years, and that number plummets to $230 billion.
Jeez.
So this is a seismic shift
Yeah.
in their sourcing strategy.
Okay, so that's a huge swing.
It is.
And all this talk of domestic production, you know, is there any evidence that it's actually meeting the demand?
Well, the Financial Times did a deep dive into this,
Okay.
and their reporting suggests that China's domestic chip production has surged in recent years.
Okay.
And they're not just making more chips, they're making better chips.
Okay, so they're making their own chips and they're good.
Yeah.
What kind of impact is this having on the global market? I mean, who are the winners and losers in this whole semiconductor saga?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It sounds like the US might be on the losing end.
Well, it's possible.
Let's dig into that a little bit. We were just talking about how China's really stepping up their game when it comes to making chips. But what does this mean for the rest of the world? I mean, who's feeling the heat from this and who might actually benefit?
Yeah. Well, one thing's for sure, U.S. companies are definitely feeling the squeeze. They were really banking on that Chinese market for a big chunk of their revenue.
Yeah, they were selling a ton of chips over there.
Exactly. So when China starts making their own chips and doesn't need to buy as many from the U.S., well, that hurts.
So what's the damage looking like so far?
Well, take Intel, for example. Their sales in China dropped by a whopping 27% in just the third quarter of 2023 alone.
Ouch. That's gotta sting.
And it's not just them. Texas Instruments, another big chip maker, took a $2.3 billion hit because demand just dried up.
That's rough. It sounds like the U.S. tech industry, which was used to being top dog, is having to face some new competition.
It's definitely a wake-up call. It's like that old saying, disrupt or be disrupted.
Adapt or die.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the Chinese market's becoming less and less reliant on those U.S. chips. So American companies are scrambling to figure out a new game plan.
So is the U.S. the only one feeling the pain here?
Not at all. South Korea's chip industry is having a really tough time, too. Companies like Samsung and SK Hynix, they were heavily reliant on those exports to China.
Right. They were sending a lot of chips over there.
Exactly. But now they're finding it harder to sell their products in China while their Chinese rivals are gaining ground.
So they're kind of getting hit from both sides, losing their biggest customer and facing tougher competition at the same time.
That's pretty much it.
Are there any numbers to show how badly they've been affected?
Yeah, Bloomberg has reported some pretty grim figures. Samsung's semiconductor division, their revenue went down 12% in the third quarter of 2023. And SK Hynix, they actually recorded their biggest loss since 2017.
Wow, that's a big deal. It seems like this whole situation is creating some really unexpected winners and losers. But looking beyond the economic side of things, what does this mean for the future of technology itself? I mean, chips are pretty much the building blocks of everything these days.
Absolutely. This isn't just about who's making money. It's about who's going to be shaping the technological landscape for the 21st century. And China's not just aiming to keep up. They want to be a global leader in tech.
So they're playing the long game here.
Yeah, they definitely are. Their ambitions go way beyond just smartphones and computers. They're making huge investments in things like artificial intelligence, supercomputers, and even military tech.
So the stakes are pretty high then. But wouldn't it be more efficient, maybe even safer, if countries just worked together and shared their knowledge?
In an ideal world, maybe. But the reality is that technology has become a key part of national security and economic power. Countries don't want to share their knowledge if they think it might give their rivals an advantage.
So instead of having this global tech village, we're heading toward a world where everyone wants to build their own digital walls.
Yeah, there's definitely a trend toward what's being called technological sovereignty. Basically, countries want to have control over their own technology so they're not reliant on other countries and can protect their critical infrastructure.
But wouldn't that lead to a much more fragmented tech landscape? Maybe even slow down innovation? If everyone's working in isolation, wouldn't we miss out on all the benefits of collaboration and sharing ideas?
That's a real concern.
Yeah.
Fragmentation could lead to a lot of wasted effort systems that don't work together and even a slowdown in the overall progress of technology.
So it's a bit of a balancing act then, trying to find the right mix between self-reliance and collaboration. But what does all this actually mean for everyday people? Is this just a game played by governments and big corporations, or will this tech rivalry really affect our lives?
It will definitely have an impact, and we're already starting to see it in a few ways, like supply chain disruptions,
Yeah.
prices for electronics going up, and even limited access to certain technologies. Remember that global chip shortage a few years back?
Yeah, people couldn't get their hands on new phones, laptops, even cars were getting delayed.
Right. And all because of a shortage of those tiny little chips. It really shows how interconnected our world is and how much we rely on semiconductors.
Yeah, it's hard to believe something so small can cause such massive problems.
They're like the tiny gears that keep the whole machine running. And when those gears break down, the whole system grinds to a halt.
So semiconductors are basically the lifeblood of the digital economy, and when there are disruptions in that sector, it causes ripple effects everywhere.
Exactly.
Okay, so this whole semiconductor situation has global implications. It's affecting our daily lives and it's shaping the future of technology. Sounds like we're sailing into some uncharted waters here.
We are, in many ways. The rise of China as a major player in tech, combined with the U.S. trying to hold on to its dominance, it's creating a whole new global order. Yeah. And we're just starting to figure out what that means.
So is there anything we can do to navigate this new landscape, or are we just along for the ride?
I think there are definitely things we can do to be prepared and maybe even influence the direction things are going.
So we've been talking about this whole like tech arms race thing, and it's kind of scary. But is there any way to like turn this competition into something good? Or are we just headed for like a tech world where everyone's fighting over scraps?
It's a big question,
Yeah.
you know. But even though countries are trying to be more independent when it comes to tech, I don't think it means the end of globalization. We've seen how much progress has been made by countries working together and sharing ideas. The trick is figuring out how to balance national interests with the need for global cooperation.
So you're saying globalization isn't dead, it's just changing.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're moving towards a model where different regions will team up with countries that share similar values and goals. It's like creating smaller interconnected tech hubs instead of having one giant global market.
So picture a world with multiple tech centers, each with its own specialties. That could actually lead to more diversity and innovation, right? I mean, different regions pushing the boundaries in their areas of expertise.
Yeah, that's the potential upside. Imagine Europe leading the way in renewable energy tech, Asia driving advancements in artificial intelligence, North America focusing on biotechnology. This kind of specialization could make the tech world much more dynamic and competitive.
But wouldn't that also increase the chances of conflict? Like, imagine these tech blocks battling for dominance, each one hoarding their knowledge and advancements. That doesn't sound very stable.
You're right, there's definitely a risk of things getting messy. That's why it's crucial to set clear rules for this new era of tech competition. We need fair trade practices, strong intellectual property protection, and data security standards that everyone follows.
So what you're talking about is basically a global rule book for tech, something that allows for both competition and cooperation. Do we have anything like that in place right now?
Not really. We have organizations like the World Trade Organization and the G20 that are working on these issues, but technology is changing so fast that it's hard for international agreements to keep up. We need a system of governance that's more flexible and adaptable so it can keep pace with the rapid evolution of tech.
That sounds like a really tough challenge. But let's get back to the real world for a minute. All this talk of global shifts and tech sovereignty, what does it mean for the average person? How can we navigate this new world?
The first thing is to stay informed.
Yeah.
Pay attention to the news, read articles, follow experts who are analyzing these trends. The more you understand about what's happening, the better prepared you'll be to make smart decisions about the tech you use and the companies you support.
Okay, so knowledge is power, but there's so much information out there. How do we cut through the noise and figure out what's really important?
That's where critical thinking comes in. Don't just believe everything you read. Question things, consider different viewpoints, and form your own opinions. Develop a healthy sense of skepticism and learn how to identify trustworthy sources of information.
So be curious, be informed, and be picky about your sources. What else can we do to get ready for this future?
Don't be afraid to embrace new technologies. This whole landscape is changing quickly, so the ability to learn new things and adapt will be essential. Lifelong learning isn't just a nice idea anymore. It's becoming a necessity.
So stay curious, keep learning, and be open to new possibilities. That sounds like good advice for life in general. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I gotta ask, is there a glimmer of hope in all of this? I mean, we started by talking about how U.S. sanctions might have backfired, but could this shakeup actually lead to a more diverse and resilient tech world?
I think it definitely could. The tech world is in a state of flux right now, and the outcome is still uncertain. But this period of disruption could be a chance to rethink how we approach technology and build a future that's more equitable, sustainable, and innovative. It's a tough challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity.
And maybe this competition will push everyone to up their game, leading to breakthroughs we can't even imagine right now. Well, folks, that's our deep dive for today. We've explored the complex world of semiconductors, from U.S. sanctions to the rise of China, and the potential for a more fragmented tech landscape.
We've talked about the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, and ultimately it's up to all of us to shape the future we want.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep thinking, and keep diving deep.